When darkness fell, the village of Lost Hollow was swallowed by silence. Desolate streets, narrow paths leading to farmland, and old houses that seemed abandoned made it feel disconnected from the outside world. But tonight, that silence would be replaced by indescribable terror. The village elder, Grandpa Richard, had been telling stories for years that no one believed. "Don't go to the fields at night," he always warned. "They're waiting there." But no one took him seriously until this cursed night. Late at night, Farmer Owen noticed strange lights in his field. Blue and green lights flickered in rhythm. Even the wind was silent. His heart pounded as he gathered the courage to approach the lights. The closer he got, the more his hairs stood on end, because floating above the ground were tall, thin figures. Their heads were eerily disproportionate. They had enormous, pitch-black eyes, and their bodies were gray, almost metallic in smoothness. Owen froze. His legs refused to move. Just as he was about to turn and run, one of the creatures turned its head toward him. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind, without words. "Do not advance. You are being watched." Owen collapsed before he could even scream. An invisible force pinned his body in place. A deep, piercing hum burned his ears. At that moment, screams rang out from the other side of the village. Henry the butcher's wife was trying to flee as a bright light appeared in front of their house, but the light lifted her into the air. Her eyes widened in terror, her body convulsing. Within seconds, she vanished completely. Villagers ran out of their homes, desperately trying to escape. But there was nowhere to run. The sky was now filled with massive, shifting, dark shapes. The village chief's house collapsed with a great tremor. Some villagers fled into the fields, but there too, the creatures were waiting. Some were taken silently, others with horrifying screams as they were pulled into the sky. Anyone who made eye contact lost consciousness within seconds. Grandpa Richard revealed something he had kept hidden for years. He had an old hunting rifle in his home. With trembling hands, he locked his door, clutched the gun, and began to pray. But when he saw the thin, gray fingers creeping under the door, his heart nearly stopped. He pulled the trigger, a blast rang out, but then the room was swallowed by darkness. As the night progressed, the remaining villagers who had hidden in their homes heard the eerie hum growing louder. The lights in the sky pulsated as if communicating with one another. Some of the creatures moved methodically through the village, scanning the surroundings with their oversized, soulless eyes. A few of them entered homes without making a sound, as if they could pass through walls like phantoms. Those who remained awake clutched their blankets and prayed to forces they weren't sure would answer. One by one, homes became silent. The villagers taken into the sky never returned, and those left behind saw things they could never describe. A young boy named Ethan, hiding in a cellar, peered through a crack in the wooden door and saw the sky tear open, revealing an abyss filled with moving, pulsating shapes. It was as if reality itself was being distorted. Before he could scream, he felt his body levitate. The last thing he saw was a pair of massive, lidless black eyes staring into his soul. Meanwhile, deep within the fields, a group of villagers had formed a small resistance. They hid in an abandoned barn, hoping the creatures wouldn't find them. A woman named Margaret whispered to the others, "We have to run into the forest. They don't seem to go beyond the fields." But before they could make a move, a low humming sound filled the barn. The walls vibrated, the air thickened, and then everything went silent. A figure materialized in the middle of the barn. It was taller than the others, its presence heavier, its aura suffocating. The air around it seemed distorted, as if reality itself was rejecting its existence. It raised one long-fingered hand, and the villagers felt an unbearable pressure crushing their chests. Their lungs refused to draw breath. Margaret clawed at her throat, her eyes pleading for mercy, but there was none. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished, and with it, so did the villagers in the barn. Nothing remained but a faint trace of shimmering dust. As the night dragged on, the creatures continued their methodical sweep of the village. By the time the first rays of dawn broke through the sky, Lost Hollow was nothing more than a lifeless shell. The houses stood, but they were empty. The fields stretched endlessly, but they bore no crops. The wind blew, but there was no one left to hear it. When people from nearby villages arrived, they froze in horror. No one could explain what had happened, but one thing was certain: the night visitors would return.